I want to create a world in which my son is proud of what we do, in a world and a job that actually does impact people's lives for the better.
In this video, we'll uncover the heart-wrenching events that shook Buckingham Palace as the world stopped to pray for Prince William's life, and how one moment changed the destiny of the British monarchy forever. Before we begin, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a single royal update. The world stopped moving. Across every screen, the red breaking banner appeared. Buckingham Palace confirms tragic emergency involving the Prince of Wales. Within seconds, London's heartbeat slowed. People froze mid-step. The rain tapped against glass like it was counting seconds before history changed. The palace had just confirmed what no one ever dared to imagine. And what happened next would shake the monarchy to its core. At precisely 6:47 p.m., a royal helicopter carrying Prince William vanished from radar. One moment it was a blinking green signal over the Lake District. The next, nothing. The pilot's final transmission was fractured by static, a few unfinished words swallowed by thunder. Locals later said the sky tore apart in light and noise. Some swore they saw flames streak downward before silence claimed the valley. In Windsor Castle, dinner was being served when the alert came in. Aides froze as phones began to ring. First one, then dozens. Within minutes, corridors once filled with the quiet hum of protocol turned into chaos. Somewhere deep inside, an aide whispered, "Your Majesty, we've lost contact with the prince." King Charles turned white. He gripped the table for balance. His lips trembled before he could even form the words. "Not my son. Not again." And in that instant, time inside the palace fractured, between before and after. Emergency teams scrambled across the Lake District. The storm raged, lightning revealing twisted metal and scattered debris across a slope near Ullswater. Rescuers moved through mud and wind, shouting the prince's name into the night. What they found would send shockwaves through every generation of Britain's royal story. Back at Windsor, Catherine's world collapsed in a single sentence. She screamed, the kind of scream that makes marble echo. The sound of her sobs carried down the hall, freezing staff in their tracks. A single aide dropped her phone, whispering a prayer through trembling lips. Phones rang nonstop. News outlets scrambled for confirmation. Helicopters swarmed above Windsor as security cordons snapped into place. In a family trained for composure, every mask fell away. This wasn't a royal tragedy. It was a mother, a wife, and a family, terrified of another Diana. Convoys tore through London's rain-slick streets, headlights flashing blue and white. Inside one of them, Catherine sat silent, hands clasped, eyes unfocused, whispering William's name under her breath like a spell to keep him alive. Every corner they turned felt slower, heavier, like time itself was resisting the inevitable. When the convoy finally reached the hospital, cameras were already flashing. Catherine stepped out, drenched in rain and grief, and for a split second, the world saw her, not as the Princess of Wales, but as a woman standing on the edge of loss. And what she saw inside shattered her completely. Inside the emergency ward, chaos and quiet collided. Doctors barked codes. Nurses moved with mechanical precision. The air smelled of antiseptic and fear. William was alive, barely. Machines did what his body could not. Tubes, wires, and the endless hum of monitors filled the room where royalty met mortality. Catherine fell to her knees beside the bed. "Stay with me," she whispered, her tears dripping onto his hand. King Charles stood at the foot of the bed, silent, holding an old rosary that once belonged to his mother. For the first time in his life, the crown felt powerless. Minutes stretched into hours. The storm outside didn't stop, thunder matching the rhythm of the monitors. Every flicker of a heartbeat was a small rebellion against fate. At 2 a.m., Catherine refused to leave his side. She hadn't spoken in hours. Only her eyes moved, watching the screen, the rise and fall of his chest, the trembling of her own hands, and then a quiet murmur among the doctors. Something had been found. In the early hours of the morning, investigators arrived at the crash site. Through the wreckage, through the smoke and rain, they uncovered something that didn't belong. Something that would change everything. At dawn, the world awoke to a single sentence. The Prince of Wales remains in critical condition following a helicopter incident in Cumbria. No details. No explanations. Just a confirmation that sent shockwaves around the globe. London fell silent. In the streets, strangers lit candles. In cafes, televisions played the same footage on loop. The crash site, the royal crest, the hospital gates. In front of Buckingham Palace, flowers began to pile up, rain mixed with candlelight. The reflection dancing across soaked pavement. Reporters whispered their updates like prayers. Every word felt too heavy for sound. Across oceans, world leaders sent messages. Social media drowned in grief. For a country still haunted by memories of Diana's car, it felt like history was repeating, mercilessly, cruelly. Inside the hospital, Catherine looked out through the blinds. Thousands had gathered outside, holding banners that said, "Stay strong, William." Her lips trembled as she whispered, "He will," but behind her, in the palace corridors, a whisper began to spread, one that broke the illusion of a simple accident. It started with a single line in a security report. The flight data shows irregularities. Princess Anne was the first to demand answers. "Mechanical failure doesn't vanish from radar," she said sharply during a private briefing. Something else happened up there. The military's preliminary analysis confirmed what no one wanted to hear. The helicopter systems had been interfered with. Someone, somewhere, had touched that system. King Charles stared at the report in disbelief. His mind went to dark places. Threats, rivals, the weight of legacy. He closed the folder slowly, saying only, "Keep this contained." Across the Atlantic in California, Prince Harry received the call. The same words that once shattered his childhood now echoed through his adult life. "There's been an accident." He fell silent, then whispered to Meghan, "It's happening again." Within hours, headlines spread, "Royal crash mystery, sabotage not ruled out." And by dawn, tragedy had turned into something far darker, the possibility of an attack. Inside Buckingham Palace, unity cracked. Anne demanded transparency. Charles insisted on silence. Catherine, still by William's bedside, had no strength left for politics. She only said, "Whatever truth there is, don't bury it with him." The Queen Consort, Camilla, sat in the chapel, lighting candles one after another. Her whispered prayer filled the empty air. Not him, not now, not this way. Outside, the press waited like wolves. Inside, the monarchy was bleeding from within. Every conversation ended in anger, every decision in doubt. Some wanted the world to know the truth. Others feared what the truth might destroy. Anne confronted Charles in the private library. "You can't silence a storm, brother." Charles turned away, voice breaking. "You think I don't know that? You think I haven't buried enough?" The walls of the palace seemed to hold their breath. The monarchy, built on centuries of endurance, now trembled, not from enemies abroad, but from wounds within its own heart. Catherine sat beside William, holding his cold hand. The machines hummed softly, the storm finally fading beyond the window. She whispered, "You'll wake up, and I'll tell you everything they tried to hide." And as dawn painted London in grey and gold, one truth became inescapable. Whatever was buried in that wreckage held the power to reshape the crown itself. Because behind the sealed reports, the closed doors and the silent prayers, lay a secret that would soon force King Charles to make an impossible choice between protecting the crown or exposing the unthinkable. As the world prayed for the future king, whispers began to rise from the cracks of silence. Something about that crash didn't add up, and the palace knew it. Inside Buckingham's ancient walls, secrets trembled behind locked doors. The official story was an accident, but now investigators had another word for it: interference. And while Britain held its breath, the man at the center of it all, the one they thought might never wake, began to fight his way back from the edge of oblivion. What really happened in the skies that night? Accident or attack? It started with a flicker of hope. At sunrise, the hospital released a new statement. The Prince of Wales has shown small but promising signs of improvement. For the first time in days, the sound of crying outside Buckingham Palace turned to quiet applause. A little girl holding a handmade sign whispered, "He's waking up." Across the United Kingdom, you could feel the collective exhale. The clouds over London finally seemed to lift. faint rays of sunlight pushing through, like a symbol that maybe the worst had passed. Inside the hospital, Catherine hadn't slept in 3 days. Her eyes were swollen, her voice barely a whisper, but when she saw the nurse smile and nod, something inside her broke, in relief this time. She pressed her forehead against William's hand and whispered, "You're still here. You're still mine." But even as hope bloomed outside those hospital walls, another storm was gathering behind closed palace doors. Because while the world prayed for a miracle, the monarchy was preparing for war. At 9:17 that morning, a private briefing took place in Windsor. The lead investigator entered the room holding a folder marked Classified Level 1. King Charles, Princess Anne, and Camilla listened in silence. When the officer spoke, every word felt heavier than the one before it. "There was external interference," he said quietly. "Someone wanted that helicopter to fall." The sentence hung in the air like smoke. Anne's eyes widened, Camilla gasped, and Charles's face went pale. He gripped the edge of the table and whispered, "You're certain?" The officer nodded. "Beyond any doubt, sir." Silence. Then anger. Pure, unfiltered rage. Charles slammed his fist down. "Then find them. I don't care how deep you have to dig. Find them." Camilla placed a trembling hand on his arm. "And what happens when the world finds out, Charles?" He looked at her with eyes that had seen too much history, too much loss. "Then they'll know," he said quietly, "that the crown is never safe, not even from the shadows." And at that exact moment, in that same hour, inside the hospital room, a nurse gasped. William's finger twitched, a flicker, a movement, the first sign that the man they called the future of the monarchy was still fighting to return. The machines hummed steadily. Catherine sat by his bedside, lost in prayer. Then, for the first time, she felt it, a faint pressure against her palm. Her breath caught. "William?" she whispered, tears spilling freely. "If you can hear me, don't stop." Doctors rushed in. One nurse leaned close to check the monitors. "Reflex movement," someone murmured. "He's responding." For the world, it was just another morning. But for Catherine, it was resurrection. She had begged for a miracle, and now it was touching her hand. Within hours, the news broke. Prince William shows first signs of consciousness. Crowds outside the hospital burst into applause. Church bells began to ring across London. Hope had a pulse again, faint but real. And in every home across Britain, people whispered the same thing. "He's coming back." The ripple of joy was instant and worldwide. In New York, Times Square screens flashed, "Hope for William." In Sydney, crowds gathered at sunrise vigils. In Kenya, a local choir sang "God Save the King" in honor of his recovery. Even Prince Harry, who had stayed silent until then, was spotted arriving quietly at St. Paul's Cathedral. He didn't speak to cameras. He didn't need to. His eyes said everything: worry, regret, brotherhood. For the first time in years, the two brothers stood on the same side of grief. Catherine stepped outside the hospital for the first time in days. Her voice was soft, calm, but resolute. "We are overwhelmed by your love. Please keep praying. He is strong, and I know he will come back to us." That clip went viral instantly, not because she was royal, but because she was human. But while the world celebrated the miracle, behind the palace gates, the mystery refused to fade, because the investigation wasn't over, and the deeper they dug, the darker it got. Late one night, inside Buckingham's private chambers, the truth began to unfold. The investigation's final report was presented under strict secrecy. Only 4 people were allowed in the room: the King, Princess Anne, Camilla, and the chief investigator. The report revealed something chilling. The helicopter's navigation frequency had been compromised. An external signal had overridden the system mid-flight, sending it off course. This was no random malfunction. It was precise, deliberate, and calculated. Charles stared at the evidence in disbelief. "So it wasn't an accident," he said slowly. The officer replied, "No, Your Majesty. It was a message." Anne's fists clenched. "A message from who?" No one answered, because even the investigators didn't know yet. A heavy silence fell over the room. The question wasn't how anymore. It was why. Charles looked down at the papers, his eyes filled with grief and fury. "The crown survives," he whispered, "but it bleeds." At that same moment, down the hall, Catherine was holding William's hand when his fingers moved again, stronger this time. And then, his eyes opened. The room fell silent. Machines beeped softly. The doctor froze mid-step, and Catherine's breath caught in her throat. William's eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then slowly recognizing the woman beside him. She smiled through tears. "You're not home yet," she whispered, "but you will be soon." A tear slipped down his cheek. Small, silent, but it was enough. Enough to tell her that he remembered. Enough to tell her that he was still there. The news spread faster than any headline in history. Across the world, church bells rang, strangers hugged, and social media exploded with 3 words. He woke up. Outside Buckingham Palace, a spontaneous crowd began singing the national anthem. Harry arrived at the hospital that night. No press, no cameras, just a brother walking into the same corridor where his life had changed once before. He entered quietly, saw his brother sleeping, and placed a hand on his shoulder. No words were needed. Forgiveness passed between them like air, unseen but undeniable. The family, fractured for so long, finally stood together again. And while joy spread across the nation, one question remained. Who tampered with the sky? Weeks later, when William was strong enough to speak, the palace released its first official statement. It didn't mention sabotage. It didn't name suspects. It simply said, "We are grateful for the miracle of life and for the love that carried us through the darkest of nights." Catherine wheeled him out of the hospital, sunlight glinting off the cameras as cheers erupted. She smiled, but behind that grace, her eyes carried everything. Exhaustion, gratitude, quiet strength. To the public, she said only one thing: the crown has endured many storms. This one reminded us why. Because we face them together. Inside the palace chapel, the royal family gathered privately. No titles, no formality, just family. Harry hugged his father for the first time in years. Charles whispered, "I thought I'd lost both my sons once. I won't make that mistake again." And when Catherine stood by the window that night, watching the city lights flicker below, she realized something profound. The crown was never about jewels or power. It was about survival, about finding light in the ruins. Because in the end, the monarchy isn't built on tradition alone. It's built on people who rise again after the fall. People who break and rebuild, who lose and love again. William's recovery became a symbol, not just of resilience, but of rebirth. A reminder that even in the most guarded halls of power, humanity still beats beneath the armor. Weeks later, as William stood on the balcony for the first time since the crash, the crowd below erupted in applause that shook the air. Catherine stood beside him, holding his hand. Charles looked out over his people, tears hidden behind a king's resolve. The cameras caught the moment. 3 generations standing beneath the flag, not as symbols, but as survivors. The winds that once carried tragedy now carried hope. And somewhere in that golden horizon, Britain found its heartbeat again. Because in the end, the crown isn't made of gold. It isn't made of jewels or titles. It's made of hearts that refuse to stop beating, even when the world expects them to. And if you've ever fought your way through darkness, if you've ever faced your own crash and found the strength to rise again, then you already understand what the royal family learned that night. That miracles aren't found in palaces. They're found in people who simply refuse to give up. If this story moved you, take a moment to honor those who fight their silent battles every day. Do you believe tragedy can make families stronger? Comment where you're watching from, because the next royal chapter might change everything.